to have two investors, two very insightful experts on this topic today. So therefore, please welcome Edward Gleifus. He's a partner at Amadeus Capital, and therefore warm welcome to you, Edward, and please introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, very happy to be here. Thanks. As said, my name is Edward. I'm a Dutchie living in Spain, so a northerner going to the south of Europe. I have been passionate about healthcare technology for the last 5-6 years. At my previous firm, M Ventures, we were fortunate enough to back the likes of Akili, Sonda Health, Altoida, and at Amadeus Capital Partners, where I'm currently a partner, we're backers of the likes of Helix, V7, Quibim, and we have a strategy doubling down on healthcare technology. So very excited and bullish about the space, and looking forward to addressing the dubious title in this session.
Perfect, great. Then I'm happy to also have Christian Weiss here from Hill Capital, and he's one of the guys writing and publishing this article. So therefore, warm welcome, Christian, to you, and please introduce you as well to the audience.
Absolutely, and yeah, thank you, Marco. Thank you, Ed. Pleasure to talk with you guys. My name is Chris, one of the partners here at Hill Capital. Hill Capital, what is that? It's a fund exclusively focused at this intersection of healthcare and technology. So all these companies which are neither nor or both, building their value add, their promises, their key features on the basis of healthcare and technology. And that is what our passion is, where we believe we will see the next big key developments across Europe and why we are backing those companies from early stages on. Pleasure to talk.
Great. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, you see we have two very insightful experts here today. And yeah, Edward already mentioned it. There was an article published referring to the end of digital health. Corona is everywhere. The pandemic situation is not over yet. Especially in Germany, we are discussing the bureaucratic approach and also the digitalization of our healthcare system very intensively. Now we have this article, The End of Digital Health. Maybe, Christian, would you like to give us some more insights on what end exactly are you referring in this article?
Absolutely, happy to do that. And obviously, it's a little bit dubious. And yes, there is a pun intended because, well, obviously, it's not meant in the way that digital is not going to be relevant for healthcare. On the contrary, it's rather that when we have been discussing and elaborating in our investment strategy of Hill Capital, we kicked off the discussion. So what is it actually doing? What companies are we looking for? And we actually said, you know, there is this term of digital health which has been running around, but it always has been treated and discussed a little bit like this special thing, which is not the key part of healthcare, but rather something in the corner, maybe a little bit more consumer driven, maybe a little bit weird or strange, what have you. And we are convinced that these times are over, in a sense that digital in healthcare has reached mainstream. There's no way around anymore in healthcare. And frankly speaking, now, I guess 80% of the healthcare companies you talk to, you meet, they are building on technology, and technology, data, software being a core part, mostly actually, or of most of the companies who are developing some sort of technology. So it's a little bit the end of digital health, that you're not talking about digital health companies anymore, as you don't say Google is an online company or Amazon is an online company. Nobody would say that. So yes, this is not wrong. But anyway, digital or online software data has become a key cornerstone component of virtually every healthcare initiative. So we thought, you know, it's time to call an end to the niche being of digital health, but rather entering mainstream mass adoption of digitalization in healthcare. And that is what kicked off this discussion. Obviously, yes, it's a little bit dubious, and it is a pun intended.
Okay, no, great. Thanks for clarification. So we see there's no healthcare system on one end. On the other side, we have digital technologies. Two worlds will be merging, and you can't differentiate and only say, no, there's one topic here and the other topic is here. So, Edward, do you agree in future we have no healthcare system without any digital technologies? They need to come together?
Absolutely. I think it's an existential matter even. If you look at where we're headed, I mean, the demographic pyramid is set to change with 10 billion people living on the planet by 2050, and the proportion of people in the workforce contributing to the healthcare systems as we know them today, proportionally being fewer than those drawing from the healthcare systems. So the way that we build our current healthcare systems and the way that we pay for the healthcare that we have is completely unsustainable. In fact, I mean, healthcare has been moving to, let's say, from being a virtue to being a right. And we like to maintain that. So we have to change something in the way that we deliver healthcare, and we have to cut out some of the inefficiencies. So by that sheer notion, a rising cost and changing demographic, the only solution really is to make efficiencies into this ecosystem and into this entire industry by enabling technological adoption. And for me personally, and large part of our investment thesis sits around the cutting back of the delayed feedback cycle. We see delayed feedback as the biggest threat to humanity. You can exemplify this by climate change. You can exemplify it by people's need to still smoke cigarettes. And so bringing any point of, let's say, diagnosis of a disorder closer to the point of onset of a disease, or any point of intervention closer to the point of need, or any, let's say, delivery of a therapy bespoke to the individual. Those are key things that ultimately not only improve outcomes, but also reduce cost due to making sure that the therapy is more effective.
Okay, great. So I think we're all on the same page now. Digital health is the ultimate goal, and you can't differentiate. But so when it comes to digital technologies, we see many buzzwords flying around. Maybe Ed, what do you think? What are the technologies, the most impactful technologies in the healthcare system?
This is a tough one, right? We live a very interesting time. The short answer is AI and machine learning, but I'll tell you why, because that's too simple of an answer. It requires a bit of explanation. We generate, 2 megabytes of data per person per second for people on this planet today. And for the first time in history, we have the computational methods to make sense of that data. So we see a reverse of notion in healthcare from, let's say, causality-based computing, which is the old school pathway drug discovery, or understanding what the causality of a certain biological phenotype is to then say, okay, so we need to treat X, Y, or Z. That is now changing to a correlation-based computing. So we can take a data set A and data set B and say, we observe that this data set is positively predictive of a certain health indication. We don't know why, but we observe that that is the case. That, if it's 80% predictive, let's say a particular way of voice or a particular eye movement is 80% predictive of anybody having the onset of Alzheimer's, that's interesting. That allows us something to work with, to then go into a much deeper change, for example, or a much deeper diagnostic pathway, and ultimately treating that disorder. So that is, I think, the major pivot and a major change, the way that we use novel computational techniques to make sense of the proliferation of data around us.
Okay, perfect. So you already spoke about where we can apply those digital technologies. Maybe, Christian, what do you think along the patient journey, where the spots where we can address digital technologies, and also here maybe where the spots with the most impact on the patient journey?
Yeah, it's a good question, a difficult one, because I mean, it's still, such a huge topic. If you look at the full patient journey across all indication areas, and if you think of what I said in the beginning, to start with, the answer is probably almost everywhere, right? Whether you go from prevention and prediction to diagnostics to therapeutics to monitoring, there's always heaps of opportunities, address points to be addressed, shortcomings. So I think it's very tough to say it's this one or the other one. However, what I would say is maybe think about it in waves of digitalization of healthcare. And my view on it is that I guess we have seen and surpassed like the first wave of digital health, which was digitalization of healthcare for early adopters, right? The Fitbits, maybe the first indications, the well-being, the sports topics. So for those people who are really actively looking to get some sort of digital healthcare support, right? And where we are now right in the middle, I'd say, is for me the second wave of digitalization of healthcare, i.e. digitalization of healthcare as we know it. Yeah, certain diagnostics areas, certain treatment areas, but it all works pretty much the same we have been doing it for the last decade. Think of telemedicine, right? Telemedicine, yes, great digitalization, great step forward, but eventually the way it works at the moment, it's still pretty much how healthcare has been done before the whole telemedicine thing. So it doesn't truly change it. And I think for me, that is the prerequisite and the key thing we're currently seeing. Then probably the key change or the most relevant points is, though, I guess, this third wave yet to come, or maybe we see the very first topics to say, how can we actually redefine healthcare as we know it with the help of digitalization? Think of really making it more effective, really making it more efficient, really making it more preventative. And I guess in the end, it all leads to this point of longevity. Yeah. And I guess it's this topic you can discuss one way or the other. But if you really think it through and say, listen, this is about pre-symptomatic treatment of age-related diseases, and how can we treat the big challenges we have in terms of cancer, in terms of cardiovascular diseases, in terms of neurodegenerative diseases. It pretty much comes probably down to the question, how can you actually address and manage and prevent all these age-related topics, which eventually you can argue to what extent is this truly, sicknesses, diseases, or to what extent is this aware of depreciation of health. And I guess that is the key thing. Everything will and have to lead to eventually, but it's a little bit down the way. And I guess we are on a great track though towards this key element, what we're all somehow thinking about. Yeah.
Okay, so you spoke about different waves, and yes, I think we also know walking along Venice Beach, everyone is now using some Fitbit to track their health. But yeah, coming to more, I would say, non-urban areas, yes, telemedicine might be a good chance to also reach out to people who are not located in the city. So what are the major challenges and barriers for people really adopting and using those digital technologies? So from a, I would say, perspective of the patient, of the users of those digital health applications. So maybe Christian, any idea of any approach we can use to make it also accessible and better understandable and easier to adopt for those people who are a bit more, I would say, shy or conservative on applying those new things?
My thinking here is as follows. So I think there's at the moment really great opportunities to really work on your health, particularly also with respect to serious conditions, chronic decisions, hypertension, and so on and so forth. I guess a couple of the challenges are, right, if you think about the opportunities out there, it's already too much almost, right? So for sometimes I have been running around, I think, with 5 or 6 different devices applied to my body, right? It's the Apple Watch measuring something. It's the high blood pressure continuous monitoring device here. It's the continuous glucose monitoring device on your arm. It's something you can use on your head to meditate. It is I don't know what, the Oura ring, of course, to measure your sleep, right? So in the end, what do you do with all these data, and what are you really targeting? In the end, I guess the key part is many of the things are eventually then leading back to sort of the same very simple topics in terms of how do you behave? What is your adherence to certain things, nutrition, sports, adherence to medication and other topics. So in the end, I guess it's about truly the question, these things will not fix it for you, right? No matter what it is, there is no treatment and there is not yet the pill to say, just take the pill and all these problems are solved. So eventually, I guess we have also to realize at some point in time, we still need to wait a little bit for what is it in the Matrix movie, the green or the red pill, which helps us or kicks us into the Matrix. But until that, there is no magic bullet. And in the end, it's very simple things which are super tough to adhere to in the long term. And I would advise anybody to test what helps you truly, what supports you to do these things, to make them better. And I don't think there's a one size fits all solution. My super gadget heavy solution, I'm sure, is not the best one for everybody, but it helps me because I enjoy playing with these things and testing these things. But eventually, it's a means towards an end. Yeah?
Okay, there's so many things out there. We need to find our way how to navigate through this jungle of different applications. Maybe back to you, Ed. What do you think? How can we smoothen this transition from really adopting those new technologies, and what Christian mentioned, being sure, okay, those are the things I want to use because this leads to a benefit for me. And what do you think? How can we make this transition more impactful, more smooth?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. First, quickly grabbing back on something Christian said. I mean, the way that we sort of define it, those three waves, if you will. I guess the wave that we've witnessed so far is existing technologies, new channels. Telemedicine is a prime example of that. There's, it's not necessarily a new fundamental technology, but it's basically a new channel that allows people to get expanded access. Now we're witnessing fundamental new technologies in existing markets. And the third wave, as we see it, which will be vastly greater than the other two, perhaps, at least in our prediction, and very interesting, will be fundamental new technologies enabling new markets. And the prime example is an investment we did in a company called Oxford Nanopore, where you can bring the sequencing to the sample rather than bringing the sample to the sequencer. It's applications like that basically create markets that didn't exist before. And we truly believe that there is going to be a very interesting blue sky opportunity in that side of things. Now, to your question around, what would smoothen the transition? It is almost philosophical, right? I mean, the only real thing that we do in venture capital is provide a tool to generate value, and value is always in the eye of the beholder. So when we started on this journey, we basically mapped out the whole supply chain, the whole journey for patients, and we said, okay, the questions that need to fall in line is who needs to adopt it, who benefits, who pays. And the funny thing is that in a traditional quote unquote environment, the payer and the person who benefits are usually the same. It's the end consumer. However, in healthcare, that's disconnected oftentimes because the insurer, especially in Europe, pays, whereas the patient benefits. And that disconnect needs to be addressed in one way or another. So at least in our view, therefore, digital solutions have to really play to their strength. It is not the same as an actual pharmacological therapy, for instance. So we believe that, first of all, evidence is key. That needs for the majority of solutions that actually address a patient's problem. So a digital therapeutic or a digital medicine solution, the evidence of the impact or the evidence of the usability, that's key. Now, the second one is perhaps a bit more contentious. And digital has the ability to put the responsibility back into the patient's hands. And so, almost what would smoothen a transition, you could even say what would force a transition. Because by putting the responsibility, but also the voting power back in patients' hands, actually patients can vote with their feet, or I should say subjects or users perhaps. And we see that happening here in Spain. In Spain, I think the digital adoption due to the private healthcare insurance ecosystem is actually rather well evolved. And so you see people actually keeping their patient records in their own applications, which in my native country of the Netherlands is not the case. Since it's all a state-funded society there, we don't necessarily therefore have that purchasing power as individuals to move to another insurer that therefore would allow us to keep our information all to ourselves. Here in Spain, with a very large privatized ecosystem, you see that that's happening. And so the digital adoption is really driven by people otherwise just moving to the competition. Now, and the last one I'm going to mention here is for digital, I think the demonstration of near-term value. In order to overcome any sort of adoption, you have to demonstrate that there is a value to the end user. And that plays into the second point I was making here. I'll give you a prime example. My wife just gave birth. The reason we stuck with the gynecologist was because all the information was aggregated, all the patient records were aggregated, all the scans of the baby were aggregated, which is something in the Netherlands or in the UK that's not the case. So that's near-term value because it allows us a very clear file, which we basically through our cell phone can provide to a pediatrician if something occurs, and therefore we stick with these providers of this particular care and making sure that we're a loyal client to them because they provide value to us, even though it's at a slight premium.
Okay, then first of all, congratulations to your child, first of all. And then I would circle back to Christian, because thanks, Ed, for also mentioning or highlighting the difference between the Netherlands and Spain. And so we see not only the weather is much more easier and much more better in Spain. Then I'll circle back to Christian. And is there any? So in Germany, we're often confronted with bureaucratic processes. Now the Corona pandemic, I would say, uncovered that Germany lags behind in several digital initiatives. So what do you think? Is there any success story or any maybe portfolio startup which kind of changed or redefined, transformed the healthcare system in a specific way? Do you have any success story you can share with us that we not only keep complaining about our healthcare system in Germany and about our digital unmaturity? So is there any success story you can share with us?
Well, I guess, I mean, first of all, it's not about complaining about the healthcare system, right? I guess, actually, after all, we have a pretty good healthcare system in Germany, and we are fortunate to have that, but we are facing some of the challenges in terms of structural issues, cost issues, and what have you. Having said that, I agree. I guess it has uncovered, or let's say maybe confirmed, that what was out there already in terms of people thinking, hey, are we truly digital, has been confirmed. Probably not yet, not truly the case. And I guess the best example always, if you look at Dr. Lip, I guess everybody knows about that, like what efforts these guys need to do just to sell and implement a freaking calendar solution, which is neither super expensive and is pretty much a no-brainer, but the efforts needed to do it shows pretty much, I guess, the resistance to change and the barriers to digitalization we are facing here, but also at the same time the opportunities, I'd say, right? So having said that, I mean, we have a super young portfolio. We cannot claim that any of these companies have yet transformed healthcare. I guess that would be a little bit too much to ask for. But having said that, I guess all our companies are revolving around that topic. Yeah? So I guess there is not a particular one to pick out, but what you could look at is, it's for example, Avi Medical, which is a very interesting example of how would you build a primary care practice from scratch, fully digitized, exactly overcoming these challenges in terms of how can I digitize an existing practice, an existing company, which is always virtually impossible. But you see that there's all these things going around like Amazon Care in the US, right? You have Babylon Health from UK and also being active in China and so on and so forth. And I think Avi Medical is a great contender in this space to say, how can we build a European German platform to start with, who's truly leveraging digitalization of healthcare, and which is particularly nice that it is a primary care approach, because that is what then patients and customers can experience in a day-to-day basis, right? It's not any, super extreme research-driven topic. I mean, Oxford Nanopore is like one of the most exciting technologies, I guess, out there. But having said this, it's probably not something which will reach like the actual hands of day-to-day patients like tomorrow, right? And Avi Medical is one of these topics where you can say this is something where people can experience digitalization as of tomorrow, right? So they have the practices up and running. And I guess we are convinced that if you think these patient journeys through, starting from the actual GP visit, that has incredible opportunities. And yes, of course, it starts with these, basic things like how to schedule a meeting, where to get access to your data, how to have the telemedicine session, but eventually also then transforms and expands into areas. How is actually a treatment or a condition X ideally treated? What is a pathway in traditional GPs practices when actually leveraging digitalization to the fullest extent? And that is something which I'm super excited about, because if you really think this through, I think this is one of the elements how truly to redefine healthcare for all patients, day-to-day experience, and also make the patient outcome much better, but at the same time reducing costs. And I guess that is what eventually we're all here for.
Okay, great. So although your portfolio is quite young, I'm convinced and confident that they will transform the healthcare system in the future. And maybe can you give us some more insights on how to work with startups and also how to select startups? Why are you investing in certain startups, and why are other startups not potential investment case for you? So what are the criteria from your point of view, Christian, to invest or to not invest into startups?
Well, first of all, most importantly, we don't know better. Yeah, I guess that's the most important point. We just do our best every day to find the best founders with the most promising ideas. But eventually, I guess everybody who has been in this business for a while has to admit, just we don't invest in a company, luckily, does not mean the company cannot be successful. That's just super important to point out. Having said this, eventually, particularly at this early stage, it is about the founding team, right? So we are trying to give rocket fuel to baby rockets and help these guys to build something great. So eventually we know it's going to be tough. So we look for founders who really have the vision and the mission to build something great, to drive change, to transform healthcare system. That is the key prerequisite for everything else, right? So if you have great founders in a shitty market, they can fix it. The other way around, super difficult. Yeah. Having said that, of course, the more techy, the more sciencey you get, then it also is a little bit more, about what is the research behind it, how valid is it, what is data points, what is the proof of concept. But eventually, I think the one thing which is always common is we are looking for the really mission and vision driven founders who want to redefine healthcare as we know it. And that is the key and most important component we are looking for.
Okay, great. As we have, or as I assume, we have plenty of founding teams of promising and innovative startups in the audience today. I would like to go back to you, Ed, and ask you actually the same question. So what are the criteria for you to invest in a startup, and on what, I would say, areas should startup focus on when they approach you?
I'm going to take the long way around. I'm going to turn it around a little bit, but I like what Christian said there. It's rocket fuel, venture capital. So I always stress the point that venture capital is not an end goal. It is a tool. Very successful companies have been built without venture capitals. Very successful companies have been built with just bank loans. So if you get venture capital in, if you attract it, the let's say pressure that is on our shoulders as managers of this money and that we impose on our portfolio companies is the pressure to return a multiple of the capital invested. And that means, therefore, that we look at big markets. Just to give you some back of the envelope numbers, we invest in a 150 million fund, and we invest in 12 to 15 companies. Let's say 50 million per fund or 50 million per venture. Each of those ventures has to have the potential to return the whole fund. So that means that if we, own by the end of it 20% of a company, you can do the math on how much that company needs to generate in terms of value. Being a unicorn 2 or 3 times over, in order for us to return that amount of money to our investors. So that's what we're looking for. And if you then think about what is the valuation of such companies justified by, that in the end is justified by revenues and by a market demand, by value given to the end consumers, which are usually patients. So that's really what we look for. Is the market big enough? Is the demand big enough? Can we quantify it in any way? So more tangibly speaking, for digital solutions, is the need, do they get the need right? Has there been a demonstration of near-term value for patients, and is that extrapolatable? I don't know if that's a word. Can we extrapolate that into the future? Is there a possibility to overcome adoption problems? Can we demonstrate value to incumbents in any way that ultimately this can be a very big venture, a very big technology? Can we do such a thing with a low burn or a short time to profitability? And ultimately, can we get to market quickly, and can we get agile learning from customer feedback? And that last thing, I think, comes from the fact that venture capital by its sheer virtue is drawn into markets where you can de-risk quickly. And that's why you see a vast difference between traditional life science investing, where you essentially de-risk assets through a regulatory pathway, and technology, where you de-risk assets through quick market feedback. This particular investment strategy finds itself in the middle, and that's why it's unique. That's why it's got the strengths of both, but also the weaknesses of both. And that's why it's actually a very interesting investment space to hopefully make a splash in.
Okay, great. And so if you have invested in a startup, so you will manage the capital, you will guide the startup, you will help them, you will support them. Could you give us some more insights on how this support actually looks like over a certain period of time until they become the unicorn one day?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it really comes from, let's say, the early stages, the team. What does the team look like? What are the team needs? What are the team gaps? Can we augment that? Can we help find the right talent, either on the board, in the C-suite, or below that, to make sure that the team is positioned to execute the plan? Then, of course, plotting the business plan. I mean, for me, usually the question is, what does the company have at its core? So what's the technology? Where does the company want to go? And how can we make sure that we put all the right puzzle pieces in between to get to that goal? And what can we do as investors through connections, through client feedback, to make sure that those goals are achieved? And lastly, of course, there's two types of companies: those that build into profitability and those that are building into a next financing round. The majority of our companies build into next financing rounds. So making sure that we also open doors to co-investors who can ultimately, do the big blowout growth rounds and make sure these companies become global entities.
Okay, maybe Christian, can you add something and share some insights on how Heal Capital will work with startups and support them along their journey?
I think there is no fundamental difference. I think there's two things I can add. Most importantly, I guess, eventually it is the founders and the executive teams who need to run the show, right? So I guess there is sometimes these things like what we call investor-led companies. But that is nothing we are looking for here in venture capital. There might be something in PE buyout or alike, but I guess one way or the other, every founding team needs to be able to completely do that themselves one way or the other, right? Otherwise, we probably would not come to the conclusion that's the perfect fit here. Second point is, I guess eventually it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day firefighting for founders, which is obviously there, right? I don't think there's any situation comparable to being a founder of early stage company with all these fires popping up every day. So I guess the only thing we can do and offer here is eventually try to sometimes, look beyond the day-to-day firefighting and maybe what's a little bit more out in the horizon, and not to get lost there in too much into the firefighting, which needs to be done, of course. Having said that, with Heal Capital, we do have a little bit of a special situation in the sense that we are deeply entrenched in the German and DACH healthcare ecosystem. So we have mainly healthcare insurance companies as our LPs. We probably have very tight, close relationships and exchanges with all sorts of payers, providers, and what have you. And we proactively try to do the matchmaking between portfolio companies, our startups, give them advice, connections, introductions. But once again, eventually, right, we just can help to tee up the penalty shot. Eventually, we cannot carry the ball into the goal, and we shouldn't do that. So that is then again still up to the founders. But we absolutely, I think, can accelerate things here, which usually would be quite tedious and take some more time. But that is something we are particularly proud of and pay a lot of attention, and which I think is valuable in these super dynamic days and in this ecosystem, which is not, it's not the easiest to play, I'd say, by founders, because it is not yet digitized. There is certain, I guess, hindrances in terms of digitalization. So it can be super valuable to have, let's say, the extra 10 seconds of time to pitch something, to explain something. And yeah, we believe in that.
Okay, great. Then I would say also, as we are coming to the end, so we've talked about there's no digital health in the future anymore, because there will be no healthcare system without digital anymore in the future. So therefore, I think we're all on the same page. We come to the point that digital health will merge into the healthcare system. There's no differentiation in the future between those topics anymore. I would say final remarks from both of you. Edward, final remarks on this conversation, maybe an advice and a hint to one of our audience, to the audience, maybe to startups, maybe to other healthcare providers or pharmaceutical innovation managers, and so on. Final remarks, Ed, please.
I would say, digital and healthcare is here to stay. So yes, it is a complex and challenging endeavor, perhaps, given that the regulation is fierce or whatever. Don't be discouraged. It is here to stay. And if you have an interesting proposition, please feel free to drop me an email.
Okay, so guys, afterwards reach out directly to Ed. And Christian, as we actually started this whole conversation based on your article, I would say you have the final word and the final remarks to this conversation.
Absolutely. I think my key point is, I think the time for health tech startup, and maybe let's bury that digital health, because it has this consumer consultation. I think the time for health tech startups never have been better. Yeah, I think we have seen also the waves of digitalization in B2B, B2C, hardware, software, fintech, and now we are at healthcare. Now is the time, also from a European perspective. I guess we will see, key healthcare platforms emerging in the future. Let's make sure also we build a couple of those here in Europe and also Germany. I think we can do that and we will do that. And I would encourage every founder to look at this fascinating space. It's great to see that more and more second and third time founders from other areas, being deep tech, being marketing, being B2C, are now starting to, build forums and create teams to tackle these space. And we believe in that space. Otherwise, we wouldn't do this on a day-to-day basis. And looking forward to see how that ecosystem will develop, and hopefully make it a success jointly. We can just make sure to do our part. But great area to be in these times, and pleasure to talk with you guys.
Great. So the audience, you see, if you're a startup founding team, it's now the time for your health tech venture. And if you need support, reach out to Ed from Amadeus Capital and also to Christian from Heal Capital. Thanks, Christian. Thanks, Ed, for being part of this investors discussion panel, and stay healthy. See you soon.
And thanks for hosting, Marco.
Bye-bye.